Imagine being exhausted after a long flight, finally arriving at your hostel at 3 a.m. That's exactly what happened to a 23-year-old traveler visiting Paris to meet a girl he'd been talking to online. He booked a hostel not far from her, opting for a cheap bed since his pockets weren't full. He arrived at the small, somewhat smelly hostel and was led to his 6-bed dorm. 5 beds were empty, but on one, a guy was hunched over his laptop, typing away. Our traveler said, "Hey," but the guy barely looked up, completely absorbed in his work. The room light was still on, so the traveler politely asked if he could turn it off. The guy looked at him with a blank stare, then slowly nodded with a weird smile. The traveler flipped the switch and quickly fell asleep. A couple of hours later, he woke up. The room was still dark, and strangely, all the other beds were now empty. Where had the guy gone? He dismissed it, figuring the guy had left and maybe a hallway noise woke him. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint traffic outside. Then, his bed shook slightly, and he heard a soft creak from the metal frame, followed by a disturbing, heavy breathing sound. He looked up in horror. Peering over the edge of the top bunk, upside down, was the same guy. His longish black hair hung down, and that same creepy smile was plastered on his face as he stared directly at him. A scream ripped from our traveler's throat as he scrambled off the bed. The guy sat up in the top bunk, still staring, and then started to laugh, a really strange, off-putting laugh. Frantically, the traveler turned on the light and started checking his bags, all while keeping a wary eye on the man. That's when he heard a click, and saw the guy holding up his phone, clearly having just taken a picture. The laughing continued. Something was seriously wrong with this man. Shaken, our traveler grabbed his bag and rushed to the front desk, demanding a private room. The worker wouldn't give him a discount, but promised to check on the room. No police were called, but a scathing review of the hostel was definitely left. The rest of his trip was good, but a chill ran down his spine every time he returned to the hostel, wondering if he'd see that unsettling smile again, and knowing a picture of him was on that weirdo's phone. Our next story comes from an experienced solo traveler who had stayed in countless hostels without issue, until he visited Rome. This was his first time in the city, and he was excited to explore. He booked a stay at a place called Freedom Traveler Hostel, which was a bit tricky to find as there were no signs outside. Upon entering, he was greeted by a friendly woman at the front desk. She showed him to his 4-person room, which had a green theme and wasn't huge. The worker mentioned the hostel wasn't very full, which he thought would mean more privacy. She then pointed to a shed in the back garden for luggage storage, but he decided to keep his bag in the room, as he didn't have anything too valuable. Exhausted from his travels, he quickly changed and laid down for a nap. Not long after, there was a knock, and 2 young men walked in. They had thick Italian accents and immediately started chatting, even though he was trying to nap. Being polite, he engaged with them. They introduced themselves as Marco and Lucio, brothers. Marco was huge, Lucio a bit smaller, but both looked tough with tanned skin and receding hairlines, despite being in their early 20s. They didn't seem super friendly, but he figured they were okay. After a brief chat in English, the brothers started speaking in Italian amongst themselves. What they didn't know was that our traveler understood Italian. He immediately heard them talking about him and laughing, with Marco calling him some silly white boy. He could have said something, but decided to keep up the act of not understanding. Eventually, they left the room, waving goodbye. He noticed they didn't have any luggage, making him think they stored theirs in the shed. He spent some time mingling in the garden and then headed out to explore the city. Many hours and 2 food stops later, he returned to the hostel. The common areas were empty, so he decided to get an early night's sleep. He doesn't remember falling asleep, but he distinctly remembers waking up. The room was dark, but he heard whispering voices. The brothers were back. He lay still, listening to their Italian conversation. One of them whispered something that sounded like, "Just grab it," or, "Are you gonna do it?" He had a terrible feeling they were talking about his bag. He waited for the sound of his luggage being moved. Instead, he felt a sweet-smelling, cold, wet cloth being pressed to his face. He yelled, swatting it away, and turned to see one of the brothers standing over him. "What are you doing?" he screamed. The man tried to subdue him, but he kicked him off the bed and screamed for help. The other brother pulled the attacker away, and the two men bolted from the room. Terrified, he grabbed his bag and shoes and ran to the front desk. The night worker confirmed he saw the two guys leave, but there was no record of them staying at the hostel. They were just random locals trying to rob guests. They had actually tried to chloroform him. He immediately left the hostel. While he's sure security is tighter now, he realized that night that anyone could have just walked in. This terrifying experience made him much more careful about the hostels he chose. Our final story takes us to Miami Beach during Art Basel. A solo female traveler decided to stay at Bikini Hostel, a lively place popular with young people. Hotels and Airbnbs in Miami are pricey, so a hostel was the perfect solution. She mostly used the hostel as a place to sleep, appreciating the lockers for her bags, which gave her peace of mind while she explored the city. On her first night, she met some of her mixed dorm roommates. She was the only female, but wasn't uncomfortable with it, as she was there to save money, not necessarily socialize deeply. The next morning, she woke up and immediately looked for her phone, which she thought she left on her bed. It was nowhere to be found. Panic set in. She asked everyone in the room if they'd seen it, and even had the guy next to her call her number. No ring, no sound. She started to doubt if she'd even brought it back to the room. Using her roommate's phone, she called her friend Mia, telling her about the lost phone and arranging to meet for brunch. She checked the room one last time and asked the front desk to call her if anyone turned it in. At brunch, she used Mia's phone to log into iCloud and check, Find My iPhone. It showed her phone's last known location was the hostel, 2 hours ago, which gave her a little hope. Maybe it was just buried in her bag or locker. They went back to the hostel and searched everywhere again, the room, the locker, her bag. Still nothing. It made no sense, but she refused to let it ruin her trip. They spent the day at Art Basel, had a late lunch, and hit a few bars. At some point, she checked Find My iPhone again. This time, it said her phone had moved and was basically right on top of them. Mia and her boyfriend joked, "Are you sure you don't have it on you?" She insisted she didn't. She looked around, but what would she even look for? She put her phone into lost mode. Mia's boyfriend loudly asked if anyone found a lost phone, but no one came forward, though some people did leave. They tried calling her phone repeatedly, and it would ring, but no one picked up. Later that night, she walked back to the hostel to change. As she walked, she started to accept that her phone might be gone for good. But then, she noticed a weird-looking guy following her, taking every turn she did. She didn't think he realized she noticed, but she was highly suspicious. Back in her room, before changing, she checked Find My iPhone on her laptop. The location was back at the hostel. Excitement surged, maybe someone was returning it. But the front desk had nothing, and no one in the hostel admitted to having it. She went to Instagram on her laptop to message Mia about meeting up, then took a quick shower and changed. When she came out of the bathroom, she was shocked. The man she thought was following her was sitting on one of the beds, on his phone. There were 2 other guys in the room. A chilling thought struck her. She quickly messaged Mia, "Call my phone right now." Mia replied, "Okay," and then our traveler heard it, the distinct sound of a phone vibrating in a pocket. She looked up at the guy, who suspiciously looked back at her at the exact same moment, as if he knew. That told her everything. "Give me my phone," she yelled, "I got you." The other two guys in the room, Mark and Paolo, immediately stepped in, demanding the guy empty his pockets. He listened, and sure enough, pulled out her phone. She snatched it from his hand and explained to Mark and Paolo that he had been following her all day and intentionally avoiding returning her phone, which he likely took while she was asleep. The guy grabbed his backpack and hurried out of the building, never to return. She made friends with Mark and Paolo, who came out with her to meet Mia. She's incredibly grateful they were there, wondering how differently things might have played out otherwise.